Riku had activated his special ability. That meant their parley had broken down. Ainz immediately cast his spell. Greater Teleportation. Ainz teleported all the way to the edge of the translucent dome. After his sight had adjusted, he found the translucent barrier blocking his way. Teleportation failed. He took a look around. It appeared as though Riku did not have the ability to follow him through his teleport. He was nowhere to be found. In the direction Ainz was looking towards, an unknown distance away, was his intended destination, the great underground tomb of Nazarick. He could at least confirm one thing of this barrier. It cut off teleportation completely. That said, since he was now in front of the barrier, that meant that teleportation to destinations within it was still possible. Only teleportation in and out of the dome was disabled. It seemed like if one were to try and teleport outside, they would instead be teleported to the edge of the dome closest to their intended destination. This was crucial intel. He had originally intended to not use teleportation throughout this battle, but it was still worth it to have gained this intel, at the cost of one of his trump cards. Ainz then extended his hand to touch the barrier. If it had defensive capabilities, he would probably receive the damage immediately, but that was unlikely. He thought so because the interrupted teleportation did not do damage to him either. The bones in his finger made contact with the barrier. Contrary to his soft appearance, it was extremely hard. When he tried to exert force on it, never mind breaking, it did not phase at all. It was like a wall that separated worlds apart. Ainz pulled out a common gold coin and tossed it. The coin hit the barrier and bounced off. Next, he cast a lightning spell at a pre-calculated angle. It cannot get through. Just as he became satisfied with the results of his experiments, the delayed teleportation spell activated once again. No doubt it was Riku. Ainz cast Body of Effulgent Beryl and stood there, with his back towards Riku. After Riku showed up, he used some unknown object to slam into Ainz's body at high speeds. Because it was bludgeoning damage, it was completely nullified by Body of Effulgent Beryl. But for whatever reason, his body was sent flying and pressed against the barrier. That was highly unusual. Normally when an attack's damage had been nullified, its secondary effects would not apply. However, Riku's attack did not follow this rule. So what did that mean? He had no idea as of yet. Ainz slowly and regally turned around. The hammer returned to Riku's side. The four weapons that surrounded Riku were different from before. They were all glowing white. Combined with the armor, they looked undeniably badass. On the other hand, Riku's health had decreased even further. He had lost more health than when he activated that ability on his armor just then. Was it because he had to apply that ability to each weapon separately, or because teleportation had cost him a bit of HP too? Ainz desired more intel. I am immune to bludgeoning damage. I believe I have said that already, so how did you do that? Even if you can teleport, you cannot use it to escape this barrier. Your fate is to perish here. Answer the question, Dumbus, Ainz thought, but did not say it out loud. After all, if he wanted his opponent to talk, he had to avoid pissing him off too much. I see. I am impressed that you could create such an inescapable barrier. I assume then that you have made your resolve already. No response. One of the four weapons, the greatsword, stopped moving. He is coming. Riku did not appear to wish to converse with him. Ainz made the first move with that in mind. Twin magic. Obsidian sword. Ainz summoned 2 obsidian swords and rushed at Riku. If his opponent used floating weaponry, he would do the same. One of the swords was deflected by Riku's greatsword, and the other's strike was dodged in an unnatural manner. What? Ainz could not help but vocalize his thoughts. What was shocking was not the fact that Riku could dodge the attack, but rather how he had dodged it. Not even Cocytus would be able to pull off what Riku just did. Riku had performed a sideways somersault at head's height to dodge the attack. Although there were other oddities apart from what he had just done, Ainz should not be focusing on those details right now. The questions laid in the fact that those movements were inhuman. Normally when a humanoid jumped, they would bend their knees and apply force on them. There should be reflexive movements before the actual jump. However, Riku skipped all of that, applied no force at all, yet still performed a sideways somersault in the same stance he had this entire time. Well, it was not impossible, especially with spells like Fly. Not even Ainz could pull it off. One's body would always reflexively move in a certain manner when performing such actions. Perhaps those who were adept at using Fly would be able to do those moves, but Ainz still felt weirded out by those movements. The explanation for it was just on the tip of his tongue, but his brain could not express it properly. While Ainz was getting increasingly annoyed, Riku counterattacked with his greatsword. Ainz's 2 swords were deflected by the other weapons floating around Riku. The greatsword, as if it had a mind of its own, flew towards Ainz, prompting him to think of his guild weapon. Ainz cast defensive magic in response. Wall of Skeleton. The greatsword clashed with the newly created wall. The wall of skeleton was destroyed in a single hit. Impressive. In place of where the wall of skeleton stood, the honed edge of the greatsword pointed towards Ainz as it hovered. He had thought that it would return to Riku's side after that, but instead it flew towards Ainz as if someone was wielding it. On the contrary, Riku was standing still in his original position, in his original pose. From his observation of that pose, what had been at the tip of Ainz's tongue finally came out. Indeed, he was just like a puppet. Riku was moving around like a puppet whose strings were still intact. It was as though giant hands were behind him, one controlling the body and the other controlling the weapons. This isn't something like psychokinesis controlling the weapons, but the armor too. Unless, the insides are empty. Or was a living person within it too. Faced with the greatsword's cleave from top to bottom, Ainz pulled out a blasting staff to intercept it. The amount of pressure exerted on him made him feel as though he was sinking into the ground. If he had weapon destruction skills, it would be worth his time to target this greatsword specifically, but Ainz had not bothered to learn such skills. Even anti-material acid spells would take quite a bit of time to chew through this sword, so he was better off attacking Riku instead. Grasp Heart. That was Ainz's favorite necromancy spell, yet it had no effect on Riku at all. Did he have immunity against necromancy? Or was it resistance against negative status effects? While Ainz was still considering those things, the greatsword was swung at him at even greater speeds. He could neither tank nor dodge it in time, so his body took the full brunt of that attack. After receiving the blow, Ainz backed off a little only to bump against the barrier behind him. This position was disadvantageous for him. Greater Teleportation. Ainz teleported upwards. Because they were summoned through non-conventional summoning magic, the two swords soon returned to Ainz's sides. As he was right above his opponent, he would have been easy to spot. Ainz did not teleport a long distance away, nor did he intend to bide time until Albedo arrived. This battle was what he had been craving. Just as a precaution, he cast Body of Effulgent Barrel again while observing Riku, who appeared to be a dot from his perspective. He began to ascend as soon as he spotted Ainz. He did not try to attack Ainz with his weapons, that was probably due to a range restriction. Ainz responded by descending. The moment they passed by each other, he threw out the twin obsidian swords. The obsidian sword constructs could only be used as an offensive tool, and could not be used to defend oneself. That was because the obsidian sword suffered from a mass loss of durability, if used to receive an opponent's attack. If used offensively, the sword's durability would rapidly diminish until they shatter. Riku used the weapons around him to deflect the two swords that were soaring through the skies. Did he put his all into defense? Riku did not choose to counterattack. After brushing past Riku, Ainz landed on the ground only to find the spear falling towards him at ludicrous speed. Ainz leapt forward, barely dodging the attack. Because he had fly activated already, he did not have any issues getting back on his feet. Ainz stood up to distance himself away from that spot as Riku casually descended to the ground. His three weapons floated around him, and the spear that had been implanted into the ground soon joined their ranks again. Ainz also had his two obsidian swords float by his side. His movements made it all the less believable to Ainz that a living being was in that armor. His knees did not bend at all when he landed. It was at this time when Riku, who had been standing with the same pose this entire time, suddenly took the greatsword into his own hands. This distance between them was closed in an instant. This was the fastest speed he had moved at yet. He was like a shooting star. Ainz sent out the two obsidian swords to intercept Riku's attack, but they were deflected by Riku's katana, subsequently falling onto the ground. Call Greater Thunder. Multiple streaks of lightning converged on Riku, yet he did not slow down at all. It was not as though he had not taken damage. Ainz could see his HP pool falling. It was more likely that he had suppressed all forms of pain. The greatsword was raised high above Ainz's head as it was cleaved downwards. Oof. The moment Ainz took damage, he saw from the corner of his eye Riku's katana swinging in from the side. Ainz began waving his blasting staff. Riku tanked that attack with his own body. A magic caster's physical strikes were not so impressive, so if he chose to tank that hit, he must be planning to strike Ainz too. His deduction was correct. If Ainz were in his shoes, he would have done the same. However, that was a terrible, terrible mistake under these circumstances. Ainz smiled deep down as the shockwave began propagating outwards. Riku was not far away. Blasting Staff had a similar enhanced knockback enchantment as Yamaiko's female sensei's Iron Fist of Wrath. The cost of that enchantment was the staff's complete lack of offensive capabilities, but it granted distance between a magic caster and their foe, one of the most important things to a caster. Was it because he had been knocked back? The katana's strike only grazed Ainz by a little, barely touching his sternum. Riku remained unyielding in pose even after he was knocked back. Ainz cast another spell. Summon 10th tier undead. The one to replace the twin obsidian swords was the level 70 melee warrior Doomlord. A russet crown sat on his dome, and a blood-stained cape hung off his back. Adorning his full-plate armor were multiple scythe-like curved blades. Minute amounts of negative energy ebbed from the gaps in its armor, in the form of a foul black smog. His health was constantly decreasing, a penalty placed upon the Doom Lord for its agility, which was unthinkably high for a level 70. Optimal use of such a summon required mastery over unit placement. However, Ainz just wanted him to be his shield, so none of that mattered to him. Summons were either used as shields or swords. Magic casters who could use them were all pretty strong in general. That said, a powerful pure warrior build could easily ignore these summons. For example, what would Cocytus do? He would probably kite the summons towards the summoner to bring the both of them into his range. What would Albedo do? She would probably use her defensive capabilities to her advantage to charge straight for the caster, completely ignoring the summons. She could also redirect aggro so that they would kill each other. So, what would Riku do? Riku's tactic up till this point had been to rely on his auto-attacking weapons. Though he had wielded his greatsword, he had not used any special abilities or martial arts to go along with it. For that reason, Ainz did not have a firm grasp on his abilities as a warrior at all. That was why. Riku closed the distance between them and beelined for Ainz without hesitation at all. An adamant action. He was probably the type to have specialized in super close quarters combat, rather than purely relying on his floating weapons. For that reason, if he were able to swiftly destroy his summon, Ainz would have lost an option to widen the distance between them.